You experienced racism. Why didn't you walk away?
That's a really good question.
You're a politician.
I'm not a politician. I don't read the polls.
Yeah,
I
are
sit
a
in Judiciary
politician.
Committee. No,
you are very definitely a politician.
No.
The very fact that there were not people who looked like you.
Hold on. I'm only halfway through my answer.
Is secret schooling happening across Afghanistan for girls?
It does.
You simply can't assume that.
Actually, yes, you can.
Hard Talk on BBC World News.
This is BBC News. I'm Vaughan Jones. Our top stories. Ukraine says a deadly explosion at a cafe in St. Petersburg shows that domestic terrorism is breaking out in Russia. Russia's Wagner mercenary group claims its units now control the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, while Kyiv insists its forces still hold it. Finland turns right. The opposition claims victory in the general election. Prime Minister Sanna Marin concedes. And the former president of Kosovo, Hashim Thaci, is going on trial in The Hague, accused of war crimes during the fight for independence from Serbia. Donald Trump is expected to travel from Florida to New York ahead of a court appearance on Tuesday. Hello and welcome to the programme. We're going to start actually straight away with some breaking news from Russia. The Interior Ministry there has just named a woman called Daria Trepova as a suspect in the killing of the prominent war blogger Vaughan Jones in a St. Petersburg cafe and placed her on its wanted list. We'll bring you more information on that as we get it. But Vaughan Jones is a well-known blogger who was killed on Sunday. He backed the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but in recent times had expressed certain criticism of the military campaign. Our correspondent in Moscow is Will Vernon.
What they said last night was that an unidentified explosive device detonated in the cafe, killing the blogger and wounding dozens of others. And several Russian news agencies reported that shortly before the blast, Tatarsky was handed some sort of statuette and that the explosives could have been hidden inside there. Now, why is this important? You know, this wasn't a Russian official, this was a blogger, lest we forget, although a well-known one. And actually the kind of pro-Kremlin military blogger community in Russia has taken on quite a high-profile role since the war in Ukraine began just over a year ago. And many of them have even gone so far as to criticize the Russian authorities, the military, you know, even the president, for perceived failings on the battlefield. You know, as we know, there have been a string of embarrassing defeats for the Kremlin in Ukraine. But, you know, it's not clear yet who is responsible for this incident. Russian officials have already pointed the finger of blame at Kyiv. A Ukrainian spokesman denied that. But what I think is clear is that, you know, this bombing will make a lot of people here very nervous, ordinary Russians, right? Because before the war, we didn't really see bombings like this happen in Russia. And I think for many people, you know, they will see this as yet another sign that for them, the war is getting closer and closer to their homes.
Interesting. And we'll just touch a little, will you, on that role of the blogger that you mentioned before, because trying to get a handle on the media landscape and the flow of information in Russia is crucial to understanding so much about support or lack of support for the war. Just talk about the ecosystem there, how it works.
Yeah, that's right. Another reason why these bloggers have become so prominent is that many people here in Russia, even those who support the Kremlin and support the war, have become frustrated, right? Frustrated with the lack of kind of information, accurate information of what is happening on the battlefield in Ukraine. So many people have turned away from official sources, such as the military, such as state television, statements from Russian officials, and they've paid more attention to these bloggers who post updates about what they say is the accurate picture of the situation on the battlefield on Telegram, the messaging service. So, I think Tatarsky, for many people, he had over 500,000 subscribers on Telegram. He was, an alternative source of information.
And thanks to Will for that. We're going to go to Ukraine now because the head of Russia's Wagner mercenary group has claimed his units now control the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, quote, in a legal sense. But Ukraine's military says its forces still hold the city. We can go live now to Kyiv and we can speak to Hugo Bashega. Hi there, Hugo. So what do we know?
So, Louis, this is a claim that has been made by Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is the head of the Wagner Group. This is the mercenary group that has been, by and large, leading the Russian offensive in that part of the country. So he now says that members of his group have raised the Russian flag in this town, in this city, in the east of the country. Now, we haven't had confirmation of that from the Ukrainian authorities. We had an update from the army earlier this morning saying that fighting continues in Bakhmut, and for a very long time, since the summer, we've been talking about the battle for Bakhmut. Russian forces have been trying to seize this city in the eastern Donetsk region, and this would be extremely symbolic because that could be seen as a victory for the Russians. The Russians would be selling the potential capture of Bakhmut as a sign that they can achieve their goals here in the country after a number of humiliating setbacks on the battlefield.
And Hugo, just on this explosion in a cafe in St. Petersburg and the death of this Russian blogger, our colleagues in Moscow are trying to get the latest details and we're hearing some updates. But on the Ukrainian side, can I just ask you about what the reaction has been there in Kyiv?
Yeah, it's interesting because the Ukrainians rarely react to attacks, to explosions that happen in Russian territory or Russian-controlled territory. And obviously, I think some people will be saying that the Ukrainians are believed to be involved in what happened yesterday, even though we haven't had any kind of reaction from the Ukrainians. And obviously, it's not clear who was behind this explosion. But I think it's interesting that we heard from a senior advisor to President Zelensky, Mikhailo Podolyak, who essentially denied that the Ukrainians had any kind of involvement in this explosion. And he said that this showed that domestic terrorism was breaking out in Russia. He said that Russian political infighting was on the rise, perhaps because of the divisions in Russia, divisions that have emerged because of the Russian performance here in Ukraine. But so far, no official reaction from the Ukrainian government following this explosion in Russia.
Okay, Hugo, thanks so much for that. Now, Kosovo President Hashim Thaci has been accused of war crimes by a special international prosecutor in The Hague. Mr. Thaci and others are, quote, criminally responsible for nearly 100 murders, torture and enforced disappearances, the prosecutor said. The accusations covering Kosovo's independence war against Serbia are being assessed by a judge at the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, who will decide if the case goes to trial. Mr. Thaci has denied any wrongdoing. Well, let's speak now to our correspondent, Anna Holligan, who is in The Hague. Hi there, Anna. Just bring us up to speed with what's happening.
Well, the trial is just getting underway here. Hugely significant moment for Kosovo, also for this court. Let me tell you, first of all, though, about Hashim Thaci, because he's a very interesting character. He's one of the most visible people during the negotiations with Western leaders to try to establish Kosovo's independence from Serbia. He now stands accused of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. I've been speaking to people just heading into court, his supporters, who say he should be considered a war hero, not a criminal. Those are the charges he is facing: kidnapping, forced disappearances, at least 100 murders. And, you know, it's not just his and his country's credibility on the line here, his reputation, but also this court, because it has already tried a number of people, and yet this is really the big one. And this court was set up, you know, sometimes we stand outside of these rather nondescript buildings, but this one is really important because it was set up partly through funding by the EU and the US, and it was designed in part to try to redress a sense of injustice that only Serbs had been indicted by a court not far from here, the Yugoslav tribunal. So there is a lot riding on this trial.
Interesting. And Anna, can you just mark our card for us? Any kind of timeline on this? What can we expect when?
Well, you know, these international justice trials often take a long time. This has already been a long time in the making. Hassan Thaci actually stepped down when he was arrested on these charges. So he was initially prime minister, then went on to become president of the country. Yesterday in the capital, Kosovo capital, Pristina, there were huge protests in support of him. Thousands of people out on the streets. This process in this building will take a long time. So today, about 5 hours, the prosecution will be setting out their case against him and the other 3 men who are charged, the other former commanders. Then later we will hear from the victims' representatives. They will have about 45 minutes to talk. And then tomorrow, the whole thing will continue. Then it will be the turn of the defence lawyers. So they will have 45 minutes each, 4 defence lawyers, one for each suspect, and it's likely to take years before this trial delivers a verdict in what is the most significant case being dealt with by this court, the Kosovo Specialist Chambers here in The Hague.
Okay, Anna, thanks so much for that. Now, Finland's main centre-right National Coalition Party has won the most seats in Sunday's parliamentary election, making its leader, Petteri Orpo, likely to become the country's new Prime Minister. Mr Orpo defeated Prime Minister Sanna Marin's centre-left Social Democrat. Emma McCarthy reports.
Relief and celebrations for Petteri Orpo after a nail-biting election.
You can see that I'm very happy. This was a great victory for Kokoomus. I think that Finnish people want change. They want change, and now I will start negotiations, open negotiations with all parties.
Mr Orpo and his National Coalition Party claimed victory late on Sunday with 20.8% of the vote, ahead of the right-wing populist Finns Party and a swing away from the centre-left Social Democrats. It's a bitter defeat for Prime Minister Sanna Marin, even though her party looks set to increase its share of seats in Parliament.
This is a great day because we've done well in the elections. Congratulations also to the Coalition Party and to the Finns. Democracy has spoken. The Finnish people have cast their votes, and celebrating democracy is always a wonderful thing.
Miss Marin became the world's youngest Prime Minister when she burst onto the political scene in 2019. Now at 37, she steered the country to within days of NATO membership and has been praised for Finland's response to neighbouring Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But at home, she's become a polarising figure. She came under scrutiny last year when a video emerged of her singing, dancing and drinking at a party, as well as her government's public spending. For Mr Orpo, it's now down to business, as he vows to fix Finland.
I want to build trust and cooperation between parties and build up the strong majority government.
Emma McCarthy, BBC News.
And Alec Neum, a political editor at Finland's MTV News network, spoke earlier to my colleague Victoria Valentine.
Well, this was clearly a thumb down from the Finnish nation to the current government. And this means the National Coalition Party, its big theme of its politics has been the economy, and especially more discipline into using state money, even significant budget cuts. But now it's up to who they will form the coalition government with. Is it the Finns party or the Social Democrats? But in any way, especially the economical policy will steer towards right.
How easy will it be to build a coalition, do you think?
It might be a little difficult this time. The National Coalition Party will seek coalition. Probably it will try it with the Finns parties, but they have several disagreements about immigration, about European Union, about climate policies. Then, on the other hand, they could also try to find a coalition with the Social Democrats, but there they will have huge disagreements about the economics, since Social Democrats have not been pro-budget cuts during the campaigns. So there could be a month, could be 2 months to find a government, but at the same time there are these two different possibilities. So it could be a little harder than usually in Finland, but definitely not impossible.
In terms of Finnish politics, several of the sort of most popular figures actually have convictions for race-related offences. Do you think the National Party will sort of be willing to take the reputational hit for having a far-right populist party in government?
That's a very good question, and there has been disagreements about that inside the National Coalition Party. But at the same time, the Finns party, the right-wing populist party, has done effort to change itself into more ready to be in the government. It has tried to not gain public attentions about these different scandals, different racist slogans, racist outcomes. So it is really possible that the Finns could come into the government. They have many times compared themselves to, for example, the Social Democrats in Denmark, but we also know they could be compared to the Sverigedemokraterna in Sweden. But it is indeed possible that they could form a government with the National Coalition Party.
Right, do stay with us. On BBC News still to come, the phone call that changed the world 50 years ago today. We'll find out more.
I'm now back in my school in Irpin. Now there is a good shelter here, and we can finish our drawings. It's good that it was restored.
This is BBC News, the headlines. Russia's Interior Ministry has named a woman called Daria Trapova as a suspect in the killing of prominent war blogger Vladlen Tatarsky in a St. Petersburg cafe. Donald Trump is expected to travel from Florida to New York ahead of a court appearance on Tuesday. And let's get a bit more now on Donald Trump's expected trip from Florida to New York later on Monday. This is, of course, ahead of a Manhattan court hearing when the charges against him will be made public. He was indicted last week in connection with payments made to a porn star. Trump denies wrongdoing. Our correspondent, Neda Tawfiq, reports.
This week, the eyes of the world will be fixed on this court complex in Lower Manhattan. History will be made when Donald Trump becomes the first former president to be arrested and to appear in court on criminal charges on Tuesday. Trump has upended U.S. politics before and looks set to do it again. He's vowed to carry on with his presidential campaign, even if convicted. He's turned his indictment into an opportunity to fundraise. His campaign says they've raised $4 million so far, with messages like this to his supporters, attacking Democrats and the case as a witch hunt.
No president in the history of our country has been subjected to such vicious and disgusting attacks. But they only attack me because I fight for you. It's very simple. Your contribution today will show the left that nothing can destroy the greatest political movement in history.
The case is connected to a $130,000 payment to this woman, the porn star Stormy Daniels. She claims she and Donald Trump had sex, something he denies, and that Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, paid her for her silence in the final weeks of the 2016 presidential campaign. Michael Cohen testified to the grand jury that Trump directed him to do it and later reimbursed him with company funds logged as legal expenses. Trump denies any wrongdoing, and his lawyers say he will plead not guilty.
This is not what so many people want to make it look like. Oh, it's Michael Cohen's vengeance against Donald Trump. That's not what this is about. This is solely about accountability. I should not be held accountable for Donald Trump's dirty deeds.
After Trump is formally booked and fingerprinted and appears in court, he is expected to immediately fly back to his residence at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. That evening, he is expected to deliver a public statement, his first as an accused criminal.
Donald Trump once again has a firm grip on the public's attention. He has survived numerous scandals, 2 impeachments, and is once more leveraging his misfortune to rally his supporters. It's hard to see the upside of criminal charges, though it remains to be seen if this will benefit him politically. Neda Tawfiq, BBC News, New York.
Right, let's get some of the day's other news now. The dominant political figure in the former Yugoslav nation of Montenegro for the last 3 decades, Milo Đukanović, has suffered a crushing defeat in the country's presidential elections. He lost the runoff poll to the centrist former economy minister Jakov Milatović. He's promised to fight corruption and told cheering supporters in the capital that he would lead Montenegro into the European Union within 5 years. A magnitude 6.6 earthquake struck near the east coast of Russia's far eastern Kamchatka region early on Monday. A monitoring agency said the quake was a depth of 62 miles. US tsunami warning system said there was no tsunami warning. Now, 50 years ago today, on a busy New York street, a phone call was made that would change life as we know it. It was the first one ever made from a mobile and signalled the start of a new era of communication. Our technology editor, Zoe Kleinman, has been talking to the man who made that historic call on April 3rd.
Mobile phones. We love them. The UN estimates 3/4 of the world's population owns a mobile phone, and there are more mobiles than people in the United Kingdom, according to the industry's trade body. This man helped make it all happen. Marty Cooper was an engineer at Motorola. On the 3rd of April 1973, on a street corner in New York, he made the world's first public mobile phone call to a competitor at a rival company.
I was on 6th Avenue demonstrating this cell phone. I took out my phone book. That gives you an idea what primitive times these were. And I called my counterpart in the Bell system, a fellow named Joel. Well, I dialed his number, and amazingly, he answered. And I said, Joel, I'm calling you a cell phone, but a real cell phone, a personal, handheld, portable cell phone. Silence on the other end of the line. I think he was gritting his teeth.
Bell had been focusing on developing a car phone, and Marty wasn't impressed.
Is this Mrs. P? We had been trapped in our homes and offices by this copper wire for over 100 years, and now they were going to trap us in our cars, and we at Motorola just didn't believe that was the way to go. Goodbye.
The way the first call was made hasn't really changed. The phone converts your voice into an electric signal, which then modulates a radio wave. The radio wave goes to a mast. The mast sends your voice to the person you're calling, and by reversing the process, that person can hear you speak. Except there weren't many masts around in 1973, and mobile phones are now unrecognisable from the first model.
Well, there's some real icons from the mobile phone kind of timeline here.
Ben Wood knows all about the history of mobile phones. He has his own collection.
So here we have really a true icon, the Motorola Dynatac 8000X, the first truly hand-portable mobile phone, conceived in 1973 when the first phone call was made on a prototype of this, launched eventually in 1984. And that device cost about $4,000 at the time, which would be about £9,500 today.
£9,000. And it's pretty heavy again. What's the battery life like, dare I ask?
The battery life on that was about 30 minutes. It would take about 10 hours to charge. Had a standby of around a similar time as well.
Wow.
Marty Cooper, the pioneer of the mobile phone, isn't a fan of current designs.
I think today's phone is suboptimal. It's really not a very good phone in many respects. Just think about it. You take a piece of plastic and glass and put it that's flat, and you put it against the curved head. You hold your hand in an uncomfortable position.
So what does Marty think about the future of phones?
We are still at the very beginning of the cell phone revolution. We are going to eliminate poverty because we are becoming more productive because of the cell phone. I just mentioned we're going to eliminate disease. Our educational system is going to be revolutionized. I think all of these things are potentials that the cell phone is going to not do it by itself, but it will be an essential part of this great future.
Zoe Kleinman, BBC News.
Right, just before I go, I just want to remind you of our breaking news, that new line coming out of Moscow here, that development, the Russian Interior Ministry saying that a 26-year-old woman from St. Petersburg called Daria Trepova has been added to its wanted list and has been named in the Russian media as a, quote, a person of interest. This is all, of course, in connection with yesterday's bombing in St. Petersburg, the explosion that killed the man that you're seeing on your screen there, the pro-Kremlin military blogger Vladlen Tatarsky. Our colleagues in Russia are chasing the details of this story. Stay with us. For the moment, though, I'm Vaughan Jones. This is BBC News. Bye-bye.
Hello there, it's a tale of highs and lows across Europe, and we have another named storm. Now, high pressure is going to remain dominant for the most part across northern and northwestern parts of Europe, dragging down colder air with it. But we have this area of low pressure, this storm that's been named by the Italian Weather Service. That's a storm Elena, and that's already brought some very strong winds across parts of France into Italy, and really gusty, perhaps damaging winds in Croatia still on Monday. Heading up towards the north, the air is colder here, but for the most part it is dry. We've got that high pressure extending into Central Europe, so a drier day here on Monday, and we've got more sunshine to come across Iberia, where it's still quite warm. Heading our way eastwards, though, this is where we pick up that big low with some strong winds around it, some very heavy rain, and starting to see some snow arriving in the Balkans over the high ground. And that's because colder air is driving its way down across Eastern Europe, so we're going to find snow falling more widely as what's left of that named storm just heads its way up towards the Black Sea. Out towards the west of Europe, things are much quieter, dry with some sunshine. We'll see some wetter weather coming into Iceland and perhaps northern parts of the UK. But further south into Iberia, it's going to stay dry and sunny. Eastern Europe, though, getting colder, some wetter weather here, some rain and some snow. Should be dry in Cyprus, but temperatures here will be dropping.